I call the member for Pascoe Vale.
Thank you, Acting Speaker, and I too rise to speak on the Aged Care Restrictive Practices Substitute Decision Maker Bill of 2024, and in doing so I'd like to begin by, of course, commending the Minister for Ageing, Minister Stitt in the other place, for bringing this bill to the Parliament, and acknowledge her office, department, stakeholders for their work in progressing these reforms. And I'd also like to particularly acknowledge some of the other contributions that we've heard through this really wide-ranging and in-depth debate, particularly the member for South West Coast is at the table for her very heartfelt contribution in relation to her story and her family's experience with respect to her mother, who we all acknowledge and sympathise with in many different ways. Thank you for sharing that. The member for Ashwood as well, who just shared a very in-depth experience of his family recently with respect to his father, who's also passed away as of April this year. And also the member for Greenvale for his very insightful and thought-provoking contribution in relation to the fact that all of us will end up, whether we want to or not, at the end of life's journey one day, and some of us may experience it more healthily than others. And so ensuring we progress reforms such as the ones contained in this bill today in a manner that make that provision for all of us, regardless of how we are at that stage in life, with that capacity to make decisions, informed or otherwise, is very, very important. I'd like to also acknowledge the contribution generally of our aged and elderly community in helping us build a modern, vibrant and prosperous Victoria that we are so fortunate to have inherited. Yesterday, of course, we commemorated the 11th of November on Remembrance Day, where every year on the 11th day of the 11th month at 11 a.m, we pause to remember when the 106th anniversary of when the guns fell silent on the Western Front, marking the end of World War I. But we also pause to reflect on the sacrifices of generations of veterans, men and women, who diligently served our country, state and community when called upon to do so. But along with giving thanks to our service personnel, it's also the contribution of generations of previous Victorian elders that we must never forget and continue to respect. Elders from our First Nations communities who for 60,000 years provided custodianships to the lands on which we've now founded our communities on. Our first settlers, pioneers and early generations of migrants who went on to create and build the modern Australia we now inherit. And of course the generations of culturally and linguistically diverse migrants who've worked hard and continue to contribute to make Victoria an even more vibrant place. Acting Speaker, when combined, it really is the contributions and sacrifices of our elders across our community who we should remain eternally grateful and thankful for. And that's why we must continue to do all that we can as policymakers to ensure that we treat and support our older, elderly and retiree and pensioner communities as best we can, so that all Victorians can be supported to age well, live healthy, active and purposeful lives as they grow older, and to ensure older Victorians are able to safely age at home or in appropriate care settings with the opportunity to maintain independence, dignity and connection to family, friends and community, whether they have the capacity to decide for themselves, as I said earlier, or not. And for elderly residents who may not have the health, means or capacity to remain in their own homes, we know that aged care homes, accommodation and facilities play that critical role in delivering aged care for older Victorians who would otherwise struggle to find and afford appropriate care. As highlighted through the Commonwealth 21 Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety, Australia's aged care system has long provided subsidised care and support to older people. It's of course a large and complex system that's evolved over time, with Australia's demographics significantly influencing demand for the provision of care and types of care. The aged care sector is now, of course, as the member for Greenvale pointed out, experiencing an ageing population with increasing frailty as Australians live longer than ever before. It's projected the number of Australians aged 85 years and over will increase from 515,000, 2% of the population today, to more than 1.5 million by 2058, or almost 4% of the population. With advanced age comes greater frailty, with older people more likely to have more than one health condition as their life expectancy increases, namely around memory and mobility disorders, including dementia and Alzheimer's more predominantly. And the Commission also identified that the aged care sector is actually one of Australia's largest employer and service industries, with the most recent national aged care workforce census finding that the sector was home to 366,000 paid workers, making up 84% of the sector, and 68,000 volunteers, 16% of the sector. At a state level, of course, we've got the Ageing Well Victoria strategy to guide our work as a government. In 2021, we had 1.5 million Victorians aged 60 and over, or 22% of the population, and by 2046 it's anticipated this age cohort will increase by 60% to more than 2.3 million people, accounting for over 25% of population forecasts to be over the age of 60 by then. And Of course, our Living Ageing Well strategy sets out our aspirations and key policy initiatives to help support that growing community cohort. At a local level, at Marybeck in my community, we're supporting through council our elderly community through the Living and Ageing Well in Marybeck framework. We currently have quite a high number of proportion of residents in all age groups over 75, which is higher than the Melbourne and Australian average. Empty nesters and retirees aged 60 to 69 account for 12,900 residents, or 7.6% of our community, and over 12,400 residents are considered seniors aged 70 to 84 years of age, making up 7.3% of our community, and over 4,600 are aged 85 years and over, or 2.7% of our community, compared to 2% across Greater Melbourne. Council does magnificent work in this space. I've got to commend them in that respect. They've continued to engage their aged services in-house, contrary to some of the federal government reforms in recent years. And Council's Meals on Wheels program last year delivered almost 60,000 meals to local residents. The Bob Hawke Community Centre, just behind Sydney Road, which has been going strong for many years, continues to produce and operate to deliver those meals to this very day. In June, the Council also hosted a Northern Elder Abuse Prevention Network event at the Town Hall in partnership with Mary Community Health. But of course, as we've seen through the Australian Commonwealth Government's Royal Commission into Aged Care and Quality Safety, there has been a number of issues, to say the least, that have been highlighted that require urgent attention, more so at a federal level, but which also have a flow-on effect at a state level, which brings me to the bill today. Because one of those most concerning areas of shortcoming across the sector relate to the use or the overuse of restrictive practices, which are actions that restrict the rights and freedoms and movement of an aged care resident, and they're intended to manage behaviour of aged care residents which pose a risk to safety for aged care residents, staff and visitors, supposedly to be used as a last resort. And some of the 5 categories with respect to restrictive practices include chemical restraint, such as the use of medication, environmental restraint, such as the use of locked doors, mechanical restraint, such as the use of harnesses or bed rails, physical restraint, such as the use of force and seclusion. Restrictive practices can only be used where necessary for the least amount of time in the least restrictive form, and only as a last resort where all other options have been explored. And I draw the Chamber's attention to page 93 in particular of the Royal Commission's report, which goes through the issues around restrictive practices in quite some details and informs the recommendations, and in many ways sets the framework for today's reforms, because this bill will basically bring Victoria into line with the new federal reforms that have been introduced that really do provide that clear consistency at a state and national level on how and when and why these practices can be utilised. And with the time I have, I'd also like to pay tribute to the aged care home services and workers across my community, Acting Speaker, for the role they do in supporting our older residents. And I'd like to acknowledge Dorothy MP Home at 317A O'Hay Street in Pascoe, Vale. It's a community not-for-profit aged care facility with the complex named after long-time Coburg resident and former Mayoress Dorothy Impey. First opening its doors in 1971, the home emerged and grew out of the early work of Dorothy alongside the Coburg Benevolent Society, the Rotary, community support, and created a dedicated hostel-type accommodation and aged care facility, which originally was up further on Cumberland Road, further north, but in 2009, Dorothy Impey Home relocated to its new modern and expanded facility on O'Hay Street, bound by Cumberland Road and Eastgate Street, now supporting just under 100 residents in its state-of-the-art facility, and it's just over the road from my place as well, Acting Speaker. And guided by their motto of tapestry of caring, the home has continued to be led and guided by Dorothy's daughter, Heather Gray, who literally was born into the job through the family and continues to do a great job to this very day. But Acting Speaker, supporting many of our local homes with their aged care workers and services are many neighbouring training organisations, including VicSeg. VicSeg was established in 1981 and focused its efforts on training and skilling up newly arrived migrants and refugees in sectors of skills demand, including aged care, including currently providing a Certificate 3 in Ageing and Disability Support. It was an absolute pleasure, to say the least, to have welcomed the Premier last week on the 6th of November to officially open VicSeg's new Job, Skills and Learning Hub on the corner of Sydney Road, Munro Street and Harding Street, expanding from their spiritual home further down Munro Street. VicSeg's newest home will help accommodate 60 local jobs of their 160 statewide staff and support local job skill outcomes, including for the aged sector, while also supporting important Coburg Central revitalisation efforts. Commendations to all who welcomed the Premier, including Marie Raftis, John Raftis, Caspar Zika, and all from across the multicultural communities who provided a really warm welcome from the Italian, Pakistani, Filipino, Lebanese, Persian, Iranian, Punjab, Indian, Sri Lankan, Chinese and Iraqi communities.